I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by the Missouri Historical Society. This year, St. Louis Magazine gave Dara Eskridge its Visionary Award. The CEO of Invest STL was laser-focused on North St. Louis long before the tornado ripped through its neighborhoods. She swiftly worked the connections she'd made to provide much-needed relief to people in need. With that effort now well underway, Dara has turned to shoring up support for Northside residents hit by the tornado to be made truly whole. When she joined me last week, I surprised her with the news of the Visionary Award, but then we quickly got down to business. I was struck by her sense that there's no time to lose in tackling a significant effort to make Northside tornado victims whole. She told me this is a make or break moment for St. Louis, the city she loves in spite of its failures. Dara Eskridge, welcome.
Thank you.
And I want to say congratulations on being named this year's Visionary by St. Louis Magazine. Yes, this is apparently the first you're hearing of this, but this is a big honor, and congratulations to you.
Oh, that is a huge honor. Thank you so much.
So part of why you were chosen for this is the work that you've been doing in North City. And I know that's something you were laser focused on even before the tornado hit. I'm wondering, where were you when you realized just how bad things were on May 16th?
Oh, goodness. So I was in a meeting in North County when the sky started to turn green and I was hearing hail. And, you know, historically, it's like North County is not the place you want to be during a tornado. So I was really concerned because my kids were in school in the city, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I need to hurry up and get out of this situation and get to them. And then when I exited a meeting early and I'm, taking the back roads into the city, I realized, oh, it happened in North City. And so it was, really truly moments after the touchdown that I was working my way through Penrose and O'Fallon, College Hill, and working my way to my kids.
So you drove through the heart of this damage very soon after it happened. That must have been just a horrible drive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For a lot of reasons, right? So I am driving by people who are trying to make sense of what just happened in a matter of seconds to them. I am, as a mom, very concerned about what's the state of things where my children are. I am also, just the flashbacks of my childhood and time that I've spent in these communities, things are coming to me and I'm wondering, oh, how is this person? How is that person? How about that building? Just all of these questions are coming up for me. And it truly was devastating to just see what happened and immediately thinking about just the tremendous loss.
And I want to just briefly touch on, your kids were okay. Their school wasn't something that was hit.
They were okay. Yeah.
Okay. But obviously so many other people were not okay.
That's right.
Up till that point, you've been involved with this you've been leading this very cool pilot project where you were dealing with people who live in the West End and the Visitation neighborhood and helping give them direct cash payments to deal with things like gentrification and displacement. But in those moments after the tornado, how quickly did you realize, okay, I've got to totally shift what I'm doing today, tomorrow, next week?
I'd say probably within 24 hours it clicked. And it wasn't so much a shift because, as you noted, our work has been focused on these legacy Black neighborhoods, much of them in North City. And more so, it was just really emphasizing, oh, our mission really is for this moment. And so how do we leverage what we've been doing, what we've learned, the resources and connections that we have to support right now? And, it was very quickly that we understood, oh, there is an application for something like Rooted, which we've done in the West End and Visitation Park, that can be supportive in this moment as well. So it was more so just calibrating what we've been doing to support right now.
So you kind of immediately went to this idea of these people are going to need money.
Absolutely.
And you know how to get money.
Apparently so.
I guess that's kind of an unusual skill, I mean, it's something that I think every nonprofit would want money, but they can't necessarily find a way to make that case. I mean, is that the job that you've been doing up until this tornado? You were there helping people understand why they need to give direct cash payments to people in North City.
It is a big chunk of the job. It's not the whole job. And I'd say getting money is a part of the job that maybe I didn't anticipate was going to be as big of my day-to-day. But it's been a really critical piece. Part of our mission is literally to facilitate investment to these neighborhoods. And that's a big part of my day-to-day work, is finding where are the resources and redirecting them to these communities.
Did that become easier in the aftermath of then this giant tragedy that sort of had the whole region paying attention?
Mostly, yes. And I credit that to, one, we came together, we really convened a table of funders and other community organizations who either had some experience with direct cash assistance or were interested in it already. And so we just set the table to say, okay, what could this look like? What's the level of resources that we need? Who needs to participate in shaping and delivering on this? And I think that having that table from the very beginning made it a little bit easier to raise funding. The other piece of it that made it easier is that we have done this before, right? And so we've built a track record, we have relationships. And so I think that meant that there were funders who already trusted us, and so they contributed to it very early on. And then there are funders that trust them, so then they follow on. And that means that, in about, what are we looking at, about 7 to 8 weeks, we've raised just about all of the $4 million, which is a much faster ramp up than we've experienced in the past.
And you were able to then give 1,300 families $3,000 each.
We are working towards that, right? So as of today, we're at about 840 families that we've distributed $3,000 to. So just a little bit over the 2.5 million mark out.
It's interesting. We think of like the raising the money as this is the really huge challenge, but also getting that money, making sure it gets to the right people. I imagine that is its own challenge.
It is a challenge. Especially after a disaster, which is a new learning for us, right? Because I think the immediate is you want to help everybody who presents themselves as needing help, right? The unfortunate part of it is that sometimes you will have people who either intentionally or unintentionally are trying to get a resource that is not meant for them. And that's really the minority. I really want to emphasize that most people are coming to it true and honest and just looking for the right resource for them. But you have some outliers, and that makes it a little bit more difficult. But also because we have raised these funds with a specific set of intentions, we have to be true to that, right? And so that means sometimes we have to, I think in a way, disassociate from, just the heart of the moment and say, but this is what we agreed to. This is how we agreed to steward these funds. And so we have to be true to that. And that means making some really hard decisions that I think people aren't, maybe aware of come with this. Sometimes
you have to turn people away, even if they have need.
That's right.
That's got to be hard to deal with.
It is very hard to deal with. And so, we do our very best to make a practice of if we have to turn somebody away from this specific resource, that we can then connect them to other resources.
So for the people who you're trying to connect with this $3,000, this is meant to be cash that comes in, no strings attached.
That's right.
And who is qualified for that? How do you decide that?
So it was originally created for households that we say, were most significantly impacted by the tornado who live in North City. And that originally was being identified by if you received a red sticker when the city did their building assessment shortly after the tornado hit. That has evolved a bit because, the city tried to do an assessment very quickly. They had to stand up, some protocols around that, which naturally means that there's some inconsistencies in this field of volunteers that are doing these assessments. And so now we've had to look at some other sources as well. So we're looking at Red Cross data because they have a pretty robust damage assessment. We've been looking at aerial footage also. And so we're just kind of layering all of these different data sets to make a determination of ultimately, can we see that this household has had their living situation significantly interrupted to the point where they're either living in a property that they probably shouldn't be living in, but understandably they want to stay there, or they have been displaced. And that's really the kind of set of people that we're trying to focus on with this resource.
So when you think about the magnitude of the needs of people whose home has been severely damaged by a tornado, and you think about $3,000, that just feels like a drop in the bucket.
Absolutely, it is. And I think that's really important for us to lift up, right? This is not the end. This is not the least, the last amount that somebody needs. This is something that gives them a little bit more flexibility in this immediate moment to handle some of the current needs. But there's a longer play here that we have to be prepared for and have to be prepared to resource. And I mean that we as a community.
And so you were able to get this initial cash to people. You were faster than FEMA. You were faster than the city.
And I think that comes, one, again, with like the experience. Of course, we don't have more experience than FEMA does, but FEMA is also a very large ship, right? Being a nonprofit that's independent, we have a level of flexibility and agility that allows us to move a lot faster.
And so for these families that you've given the $3,000 to, I'm sure there's a wide range in how they're doing today, but do you feel like in some cases this was able to make a difference? This was able to get them something they needed?
Yes, and we've had them share that with us. The people come in and they're picking up the card that has the $3,000 and they're telling us, wow, I haven't been able to get anything yet, or, so far I'm at this stage with my FEMA application. It's going to take a little bit longer, and I've got these things that I need to address right now, and this is a big help. We have had tears, we have had hugs, we have had thank you notes. And so, yes, 3,000 is a drop in the bucket, but it is a really meaningful drop right now.
We're talking today to Dara Eskridge. She's the CEO of Invest STL. We'll get back to our conversation in just a moment. First, though, a word from our sponsor. St. Louis employers take pride in their city. Share that excitement with your team, whether they're new to the Lou or lifelong locals. Take part in the New to St. Louis experience from the Missouri Historical Society and hear from local history experts. Explore neighborhoods, oddities, and landmarks, and then wrap it up with a happy hour featuring iconic St. Louis foods and local beers. Who knew team building could be this much fun? Book your tour today at mohistory.org/new. And now back to our conversation with Dara Eskridge. She is the CEO of Invest STL. They have been on the ground in North City getting $3,000 cash payments to a whole bunch of families in need. But this only scratches the surface. As we're saying, $3,000 might help somebody deal with an urgent need. It comes nowhere close to making them whole. On the other hand, we know the state has earmarked $100 million for tornado recovery. We know the city has approved another $30 million. Do you think that's going to be the lion's share of what's needed?
No. The early estimates around damage have been around $1.6 billion. I'm fairly confident that it is, several $100 million north of that, because those estimations in some parts are built on current market values of the properties that were lost. And we know that in these neighborhoods, these homes were already historically undervalued. And so we've got to do a little bit more work to figure out what's the true amount of loss that these families are experiencing.
So how do you begin to do that? I mean, you're talking about neighborhoods that have experienced redlining, neighborhoods where maybe insurance companies didn't even want to give out policies.
That's right. Yeah. Well, going to the work that we have been doing even before the storm, we had already understood that this was a huge gap in how we are valuing predominantly Black neighborhoods and the properties within them. And so almost 2 years ago, we started convening a table of partners to look at this appraisal issue. I think that there are other ways that we can go about appraisals that are not restricting comp values to properties in that immediate neighborhood. There's actually not a lot of guidance for appraisers. They have something that's more of like a code of ethics, and then a lot of wiggle room on how they're pulling values. And research has shown when a subject property is in a majority white neighborhood, appraisers are willing to go more across the map to get great comps. But when a subject property is in a historically Black neighborhood, they are more often restricting themselves to pulling a comp in that immediate neighborhood. There are different ways that we can go about this, and so that's what we've been looking at. Like, what are the other guidance that we can put into place to direct appraisers to where they pull their comps from?
Something like these appraisals that you feel like have been flawed over time, does that affect how much people are able to get from FEMA for a damaged property?
It does, right? It affects what you can get from FEMA to an extent, really. So let me not overstate that, right? Because FEMA has a very specific formula that is not particularly based on values. It does certainly affect what somebody can get from their insurance if they have insurance.
Okay. And so you're seeing that with families where these might be a family that had insurance, they're not going to be able to get what they could get or what could get them a house in a different neighborhood.
That's right, yeah. And for people who don't have insurance, at most that they'll be able to get, from FEMA is somewhere around like the 98,000 mark. You try and build a house again for 98,000.
So what do you think is the answer here? Is there a way that St. Louis can step up for these families?
Yes, there is a way that St. Louis can step up. First, we have to get agreement around what's our formula for figuring out, okay, what is the level of loss here?
And it sounds like that's something the right people are actively looking at that question.
That is something that we are actively looking at and trying to leverage some of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years to help answer that, but it may not be the whole part of the answer. So we want to be able to sit down with other groups to figure out what are the other inputs of that formula. Once we're settled on that, then we have to figure out, okay, so how do we resource making people whole? And that's going to be a tremendous effort, not just from government, be it local, state, and federal, but also from our philanthropic and corporate community.
Do you think at this point the philanthropic and corporate community has been there to the extent that they should be there to pay attention to these needs coming out of this tornado?
What I have experienced is that it has been a very disparate level of engagement and activity on the part of corporations and funders. We have some who are very tuned in to the state of things, very much committed to rethinking their community investment strategies, and are ready for the long haul and investing in the rebuilding work. Then we have others who, maybe aren't operating with the best information or don't have the resources, kind of sources for the information. And so they've not been as active as they could be. And then I think we do definitely have some that are like, just kind of, unfortunately, kind of clueless to the scale and the magnitude of what happened on May 16th.
So how do we deal with that cluelessness? Do you feel like that's part of your mission?
This has been a topic for the last 2 weeks. Of discussion that I've had with several partners and confidants, because my work at Invest STL is, like I've said before, to help facilitate investment to these neighborhoods. But it really is not my job to be the convener of funders, and I don't want anybody to necessarily see that. I don't want anybody to feel like that's my role. I think that there are other entities that are better positioned, and so I think it's helping them kind of fill that role. And for corporations and funders, please stay curious and ask questions and don't assume that everything is taken care of, because it's not. We have a lot to still figure out.
Do you think those organizations that you see as ideally situated to do this, do you think they're ready to step up, or do they need us to urge them to step up at this point?
I operate from a standpoint of, if it is our role, whether or not we are ready, we have to go.
So you're ready to go. Are enough of the major institutions in St. Louis that you think should be doing this work? Do you think they've shown they're ready to go?
I think that they are eager, and I think that there's enough people who they trust, who have confidence in their ability to fill the role. And so to your question, I think it is just like encouraging them. We really need you to step into this role. Let's go for it now.
Okay, so you have some hope here. If they don't end up stepping up, are we going to have this conversation in a year where you're going to be naming names?
I don't think I would ever let it get that far down the road without action from the players that we need it from.
Okay, so maybe we'll have that conversation sooner than a year.
More so, I might be having some conversations with people very quickly.
Maybe I won't be in the room, but you will be having those conversations is what I'm hearing. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I feel like there's some people in St. Louis who are like, I want to help, but I don't quite understand where to target that help. Do you think that's a fair thing to say at this point, or do you think we know where help should be targeted and people just need to step up?
I do think that's a fair thing to say. I think a lot of people are looking for where do they support, how do they support, where are the trustworthy places, what's meaningful support. And so I think as a collective, we need to get a lot better about having a central message around here's how you plug in, here's where we need support right now.
Do you feel like the people that you've been talking to who are sort of grappling with these big questions, is that something that could be on the way in the next couple months?
Yeah, I really would encourage that we get on the same notes about this within the month.
Okay, well, I'm going to look forward to that. I know St. Louis Mayor Kara Spencer, she gave an interview to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and she said she wants to stake her claim as a mayor on whether she's able to keep North City families, whether she's able to keep Black families here in the city. Do you think the city is off to a decent start in terms of showing that it can do that?
I'd say historically, we've not been able to show up for that, right? And so when we look at the population loss and we see, as Ness Sandoval has pointed out many times, that is really being driven by Black families leaving the city. And so we've got a lot of ground to make up, and this just puts us further back. And I think that's something that we as a whole need to kind of be staking our future on.
I'm curious about your story. You went away for college, you were in Alabama, then you went to New York City for grad school. You came back. Mm-hmm. What made you decide to come back?
St. Louis is a really magical place. There is a lot here that needs fixing and rewiring. But there is also a lot of beauty here. There's a lot of just spirit that I don't necessarily find in other places that I travel to. I mean, our arts and culture scene is amazing. This is absolutely one of the best food towns I have ever been in. The social justice thread here is deep and real. And if you are somebody who loves challenges, St. Louis is a place to really blossom in if you're willing to commit to it. And I think the merging of all of those things makes St. Louis very special for me, in addition to I have a big family and they're here. So St. Louis is a no-brainer for me. I always intended to come back here. I probably came back a little bit sooner than I anticipated, but I always knew St. Louis is where I was going to grow.
And you still feel committed to St. Louis, even despite the problems you see?
I do. I feel committed to St. Louis. I feel responsible to the people of St. Louis. I do have some mixed feelings, though, because in some ways, as I wrote in an op-ed about a year ago, I also feel like in some ways St. Louis has not necessarily earned the commitment. But that's okay. There are people here that I care about. There are communities here that I care about, and so I'm committed to being here for them.
So we're in this moment where this catastrophic thing happened to St. Louis and happened to these neighborhoods that you care about so much. And we're kind of coming out of the immediate storm and sort of looking ahead. What do you think St. Louis needs to keep in mind in these months to come as we're figuring out, okay, we need to make these neighborhoods whole. We also need to do a better job of making this a city that Black residents want to live in, whether they come from elsewhere or whether they were born here. So they're not just moving to Atlanta. Mm-hmm. That's a huge question. I don't know how you even begin to answer that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'd say first, we need to be cognizant of the clock because it's not just months. We are looking at least a decade's worth of work. And really, when we're looking at, 4 or 5 generations of where we have not done well by our Black citizens, it's going to take as much time to make a better case for how we support them. But we need to move quickly. St. Louis will either make or break in this moment. I often hear people look to Detroit as the model for how we rebuild. And I've often said, in smaller conversations that we have to make a decision as a community. Are we going to allow ourselves to quickly hit rock bottom so that we can then propel forward? Or are we just going to slow our decline? And we just never quite get to that point that then gives us momentum. And this is one of those moments where we get to make a decision about that. And I think we need to be really, really clear. There is no thriving city of St. Louis without its Black population. For a long time, we were a majority Black community that did not operate like one. It is time that we recognize the brilliance and the value of our Black citizens here and start to form a system that works for them. Because when we want to attract people from outside of the city, especially when we're looking at younger people, they're looking at, well, how are Black and other people of color being treated? If they're not being treated well and not cared for well and not having opportunities presented to them, then that's not something that I want to be part of.
Do you think Detroit does offer a good model?
I think that we maybe estimate how much of a model Detroit offers to us. There are aspects of Detroit's recovery, if you will, that are useful for us, but not necessarily on the whole. And so we have to pull the pieces that work and look for other sources for the other pieces. You talk to different people in Detroit, I think probably largely from a medium to larger size business community, they feel like they've come back, right?
Yeah.
You talk to Black residents who are middle class or working with, fewer economic resources, it's a very different story. And so what's yet to be seen for Detroit, has it been reclaimed for everyone or just a few? And so I want us to be cautious about how much we apply from the Detroit model to St. Louis.
And that seems like part of what you were working on with the Rooted Project, going back to where this all started before the tornado. You were 2 years into this 3-year pilot project, dealing with these neighborhoods that were starting to get that, Detroit kind of excitement. There was a lot of investment going into the West End. Do you feel like the tornado sets that back, or does it almost accelerate?
I think it accelerates it because, unfortunately, if you are someone who wants to live in a neighborhood that is more diverse or has just like more variables, now because of the tornado, you have fewer options. And so I think it does actually heighten the attractiveness of the West End and Visitation Park for people who aren't currently living there. And I think that means that we really have to ramp up being able to secure this community for families who have been there for a really long time, as they also welcome in other people.
So you have families that have been displaced. You have families that you're hoping won't be displaced, possibly even by the families that have been displaced. This feels like a really complicated puzzle.
It is a very complicated puzzle. And let's remember that the displacement didn't happen a month ago, or a year ago. A lot of the families who live in the West End and Visitation Park now, they were displaced from Mill Creek. So we're really looking at, 50, 60 years of displacement and Black families trying to resettle and make new places home for them.
So much of this feels so heavy. And as you say, I think St. Louis's future really hangs in the balance here. What gives you hope that this is something that this city that has screwed up so many things in the past, what gives you hope that maybe we can still get this right?
I wish that I could say that it is hope that drives me and anchors me. But, we were talking as we were prepping. I have 2 kids. And I look at them, and that gives me a sense of obligation. They need to be rooted somewhere. They need to feel like somewhere values them and that they are part of building something great. And so it is much more obligation and my commitment to them and their friends and their peers that gives me hope, if you will, that we can turn a corner on this.
So is the hope that this can be a St. Louis where both your kids will say, I want to be here, I feel rooted here, and I feel like St. Louis wants people who look like me, who are me?
Absolutely.
Is that on your mind as you're thinking about people with this tornado, thinking about these neighborhoods?
Absolutely. Every single morning and every single night, that is what's on my mind. When will people feel like this is a place that is made for them, that is opportunity filled, that is meeting their dreams and their will?
Dara Eskridge, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Dara Eskridge is the CEO of Invest STL. Now, in just a moment, St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull joins us for the closer. First up, though, a word from our sponsor. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by Cardinals Special Events. Ready to hit a holiday home run? Celebrate at Busch Stadium, St. Louis's iconic ballpark, where holiday parties have unforgettable field views, unbeatable atmosphere, and top-tier catering. This isn't just any venue. It's a one-of-a-kind experience your guests will talk about all year. December is booking fast. Reserve your spot today at cardinals.com/events. And now for the closer. Last week, Mayor Kara Spencer's administration rolled out a big change. It announced the city will no longer pick up recycling from alley dumpsters. Those blue bins will be converted to handle trash going straight to the landfill. Staff writer Ryan Krull explained what drove that decision in a story for St. Louis Magazine last week. And he joins us now to share more. Ryan Krull, welcome.
Hey, good to be here.
So the city's recycling program has been a mess for some time now. What led Mayor Kara Spencer to finally pull the plug?
Yeah, so they paused a lot of these recycling services after the tornado to sort of reallocate resources to where they were, severely needed up in North City. And sort of as that was happening, the city's chief operating officer, Ben Johnson, who's a former Air Force colonel and sort of really knowledgeable about logistics, started looking into the recycling program and thought that there were some, big changes that probably needed to be made.
Yeah, and it sounds like the big changes are saying, we're just not going to pick this up anymore. That seems like a huge shift in how St. Louisans think of themselves, if nothing else.
Yeah, definitely. And the main sort of reason for that change is that so much of the stuff that goes into these alley recycling bins is contaminated with non-recyclable recyclable trash. Recyclable trash. And so it's going to Republic Services, and they're saying, this isn't recycling, we can't recycle this. So it ends up going to a landfill ultimately. But the kind of the rub is that the city basically paid like recycling prices to have that material ultimately end up in a landfill. And Johnson told me it's about half of the quote unquote recycling is actually recyclable, and the other half ends up in the landfill. So it's like a coin flip when you put something in the recycling bin, if it's actually going to go get recycled or not.
And yet the city is paying as if it was getting recycled.
Exactly.
So that's his frustration there. This just isn't making sense.
It's just not fiscally responsible, yes.
So at the same time that residents have had all these concerns about why is one truck picking up my recycling and my trash, there's also been this concern that there's simply not enough space for trash, that these dumpsters tend to be overflowing. What are they going to do with these blue bins that they no longer are using for recycling?
Yes. So hopefully this will solve that problem as well, because those blue recycling bins are now functionally brown trash bins.
Are they getting painted?
No, that would be too expensive. They're going to get new signage. But the idea is that we lost quite a bit of recycling capacity, but we gained a lot of trash capacity because all those bins are now just for trash.
This is so St. Louis.
It is. People are kind of knocking it, because it's like we're not going to be recycling, which is definitely true. But at the same time, our alleys are going to be less likely to be overflowing with trash and garbage and all of the unpleasantness therein. So I guess as a kind of pragmatic guy, I think it's not a bad idea. I mean, maybe it's not a forever solution, but I think for the time being, to me at least, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it felt kind of like before what we had was recycling theater. We felt good about putting our stuff in a blue bin. We felt good thinking of a truck coming to take it away. It wasn't getting recycled anyway.
Exactly. And I know a lot of people are saying, St. Louis is like, we're uniquely bad at recycling. That seems to not really be the case. I guess this is an issue kind of all over the country. And I guess there's maybe some psychology at play where there is this kind of like this communal blue bin. People are just not very responsible with what they put in there.
So they're like, anyone could throw something in here. I might as well be anyone.
Exactly. There's sort of a diffusion of responsibility. So, and to kind of, the proof to that is that the roll cart recycling, which I understand is how your household recycles.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Where it's sort of every house has a sort of specific blue small bin that then gets wheeled out to the street. The issues of contamination are much less there. That's about 20% contaminated compared to the alley bins, 50%. So.
Yeah, I mean, one cool wrinkle that you wrote about in your story is those of us who have those rollout bins, we're going to be able to keep that. So if you don't have an alley and the city comes and picks up a bin for your individual house, we're going to be the 20% of households in St. Louis that can boast that we're still recycling without having to actually do any extra work.
Yes, lucky you.
Yes. So I bring that up to say there is a way that even people like you and your fellow alley folk, you could still recycle. You just have to actually be proactive.
That's true. And alley folk is the preferred nomenclature. And I think also to the city's credit, right now there's about 25 like communal drop sites where you can, get in your car and take your recycling recycling and drop it off there. And they're trying to up that to closer to 40. And the idea is to have a drop site within 1 mile of every city resident in the near future. I mean, I don't think anyone's pretending like it's everyone's going to avail themselves of that, but at least, it'll be a relatively accessible way to recycle if you're losing that alley recycling.
So I can see how a lot of people aren't going to want to drive 1 mile out of their way to drop off their recycling. What's your sense of how this is playing among the hoi polloi?
Yeah, I would say it's been pretty mixed. I do think that there is it's probably mixed. Certain people have like mixed feelings about it themselves. Where on the one hand, they understand that like recycling is really important. We don't want to contribute to global warming any more than we already are, et cetera, et cetera. And in that case, this is not good. On the other hand, no one wants to have sort of trash overflowing in what is essentially like their backyard. No one wants to have this like non-functional trash service where you take the trash out on Sunday night and there's literally nowhere to put it because all the bins are already overflowing. So I think people are sort of have mixed emotions about this. And I think there's good, both sides have very valid feelings, yeah.
Yeah, and I think as far as Mayor Spencer is concerned, it helps her that we have known this program was so flawed for so long. And there were so many examples of things in recycling bins just getting picked up by trash trucks.
Yeah.
And months where the city admitted they hadn't actually been recycling. We kind of eased into this bathwater like that frog who's getting boiled.
Yeah.
We got used to this idea that recycling was non-functional. On the other hand, Kara Spencer campaigned on the idea of making city government more functional, getting back to the basics, doing them well.
Yeah.
Is recycling a basic or is recycling the cherry on top?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess if you're going to be very charitable to Mayor Spencer, you would say that trash service is more of a basic than recycling. So they're trying to get that trash service right, sort of while sacrificing recycling. And maybe this is kind of like a hierarchy of needs sort of thing. Like we'll get the trash figured out, right? And then down the line, we can maybe make the recycling better, but you got to do one thing before you can do the other. But that has been brought up a lot. She campaigned on city services, back to basics, and now she's removing what a lot of people say is a basic city service. So it's definitely, there's very good arguments to be made that this is kind of cutting against her campaign promise. You could also argue it's kind of cutting, for it.
She's going to fix trash.
Yeah.
So one last question for you today. I heard from some readers who are saying, can't we study what are best practices in other cities? Is it too late to do that? Has this ship sailed or could some sort of amped up recycling program come back?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And 2 legislative aides at the Board of Aldermen put together a really thorough presentation doing just that, looking at sort of best practices in other cities. In what I found actually most interesting about that was there was a lot of things that they discovered St. Louis could do that other cities do that are kind of maybe a little bit less intuitive. Like one example was tying some sort of recycling program to getting a liquor license. So, bars.
To make the businesses do it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're a bar, you're probably generating a lot of empty aluminum and glass, right? So make getting a liquor license, make one of the steps, having some sort of recycling program in place, that kind of thing. And it seemed like there was a lot of things kind of around the edges that could be done relatively easily at City Hall that would improve the city's recycling that have nothing to do with alleys or roll carts, et cetera.
Well, I have a feeling you're going to stay on this story, and I look forward to hearing about more of these solutions. Ryan Krull, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And Ryan is a staff writer at St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fenske. That's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me every day in your inbox thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting, a whole lot of it by Ryan. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is The 314. See you next time.